about and would like to share my experience with data and AI in the last 20 or maybe 25 years. Microphone closer. Okay. I'm consulting a CEO of a Russian company personally, and when I met him last year first time, so that's a very interesting engagement anyway, but when I met him first time, his first question was, you guys, meaning consultants, told us that data or big data would be the new oil. And then he asks now, show me where's my money now? Because he, as much as many others, invested millions and millions into big data, advanced analytics, and AI, and most of these guys are not seeing the returns from that. So the value to companies, but as well as the value to society is not yet clear. So why is that? There was, probably you know that as far back as 2006, Ann Winblad, the famous Silicon Valley investor, she positioned that data would be the new oil. And after that, everybody went after big data architectures, technologies. Everybody talked about Google, Facebook. They would own the world because they have all this data. And many brick and mortar companies started into the journey, and nobody trusted anything else but data anymore. So everybody collected data. I worked for a large insurance company for quite a while, and it was all about collecting whatever data you can get from anywhere. Collecting the data via connected homes, connected cars, everything. But this is also a story of failures because there was a lot of jumping to conclusions. So you might know the example of connected cars, that the driving behavior would tell you about risk and about safety in traffic. Fun fact, it's not true and it doesn't work. So we invested that for years, and what we saw is that one fun fact is if you drive higher than legal speed, it's actually safer than lower than legal speed. So it took us almost a year to find out why. Higher than legal speed means that you have everything under control, and there are some risks, of course, but they're comparatively small. But if you drive slower, you always have a reason that is an unsecure reason. So for example, even looking for a parking spot is responsible for 40% of the accidents in Germany. So that's not an easy story. And by the way, if you drive with your phone, which is like the biggest risk, with your phone while driving, you do it like this because it's illegal. You don't drive like this because police would see it, and as such it creates a huge risk. So that's a story of jumping to conclusions and false positives also, using data without being too cautious about it. The next story is, do we want that? So if you look at China, and if you look at what some countries doing in the military with artificial intelligence, autonomous weapons, all these things, face recognition, there's not all wanted. And there's a lot of regulation around that. And what you see is what's mostly done, frankly, that is currently successful in artificial intelligence and data use, it's basically advertisement. If you look at Google, all they do is advertisement. All the money comes from, not all they do, but all the money they make comes from advertisement. So that's rather disappointing, and the people I know at Google, they are not too excited about that fact, and they want to change it with technology and other things. But it's a fact today. So the question is, what can we do about that? And what also happens is that given all these facts, a lot of regulation came. We had in Europe the GDPR last year. That was a long journey. We have a very similar law now next year in California, the California Consumer Protection Act, which is just a copy-paste of the GDPR, a copycat of the GDPR, and you have more and more regulation. And if we are not careful, big data or personal data becomes the next asbestos because it aggregates somewhere in the systems of clients or corporations or startups. So the question is, what can we do, and is there anything better? And usually after the last hype, there's always a next hype, and in this case it's artificial intelligence. After the data hype, artificial intelligence is the next thing. But again, people are jumping ahead of themselves. So while we control narrow AI quite well today and know quite well how that works, broad AI is still kind of a challenge, and some things work, and definitely artificial general intelligence is not yet there. But if you, so we are here somewhere. But the successes are more on the left side of the chart. But if you talk to or listen to the media, that's all they talk about. Really, artificial intelligence is the mega threat. It's super challenging, it's super threatening, and the only thing I can recommend is that you watch closely. There's still a lot of opportunities, and it's not really delivering to the promise to the day. And if your job is being taken away by AI, then I would recommend make sure the door behind you is closed, then AI doesn't get you. And it's not such a risk. We need to look at the opportunities and the chances. But we also cannot avoid AI. And I think all the discussion around ethical AI in Europe is, again, jumping ahead of ourselves because we don't really yet have it, and we cannot really block it and avoid it because other countries, especially China, are moving on. So what can we do about that? There is light, I think, and what I argue is data and AI is basically the foundation of the digital revolution or change. But if you look at companies and company leaders, big or small, there are 5 things you have to achieve. Number 1 is your company has to stay relevant in the new future ecosystem. Number 2 is you have to catch up with digital productivity. Number 3 is you have to develop data-driven business models, and it's more about the data than the AI, actually, I think. Number 4 is probably the hardest, and everybody talks about that, is how to rotate culture. So we had the argument before that big pharma companies are really struggling to change themselves, but they do that and they try very hard. So the question is, who will cure cancer and how, and who has the right corporate culture to do that? And number 5 is trust. So let me go into that. So I spoke in front of a large car manufacturer, the CTO and his leadership team, and I asked, what is your core strength? And the answer was in no time, engines. That was 2 or 3 years back, and obviously they meant internal combustion engines, and so how relevant is this anymore? How relevant is this today? The combustion engine is replaced by something very simple now, the electric engine, which you can build yourself, actually. And that's the same trend you see in IT. The complex data center and IT architecture is replaced by a cloud architecture. By the way, cloud is not a server somewhere else. It's a new computational paradigm. But also in medicine, and we had examples before, what we see in precision medicine, it's all a data and AI game. And what you see here is a real example of patient journeys. So you do all know customer journeys in internet tracking and cookies, but similarly, you can build patient journeys from touch points patients have with healthcare providers. And this data is created from insurance companies as well as hospitals. And what it can do is you can predict certain diseases and side effects of drugs. You can predict efficacy of drugs and all these things on data. So that's much more efficient, much cheaper, much faster, but it's also much more accurate. And what we did as a first try with a university in Munich is a professor there we work with, he has a theory that if you get antibiotics 10 times under the age of 10 or something like that, then your life expectancy would decrease because the gut biome is destroyed. So there's bacteria in the gut, which is very important for your life and health. It's not totally understood why and how that works, but it would be destroyed by antibiotics. And if you have antibiotics treatments very early in your life, the effect is huge. So we use the data that covers some 70 or more years, 10 million patients, by the way, or more. And we could actually prove that if you have antibiotics prescriptions, then you see people disappearing in the later data. And you can analyze and use data science to show that that is accurate information. And likewise, you can simulate clinical trials on data, which is much faster and much cheaper, and actually also much more accurate. The next is digital productivity. If you look at companies like Amazon or so, it's very hard to compete because they use data and then machine learning and stuff on top of that to be more efficient and more productive and cheaper and faster. And this is something that's another challenge for most brick-and-mortar companies, that you use all these possibilities to be more efficient and faster, and also a cultural thing, because younger people can use technology probably in a better way than the old complicated organizations do today. Where is this helpful? worked with another professor who has the idea that cancer is actually an unusual protein combination that can be blocked by artificial molecules. And this is something you cannot predict without a lot of data and artificial intelligence because the data is too big. So you use mass spectrometers to extract the data from the patients. You get several terabytes per patient per second. And the data is also quite messy because it changes with temperature and so on. And then you have to find molecules that fit into the proteins. And that is currently a pretty random task, especially because there's more than 22,000 proteins in the human body. By the way, the professor Bernhard Küstert got nominated for the Nobel Prize in Medicine for this work. But what we now try to do is we try to use artificial intelligence to optimize that and to be more efficient than ever before. And this seems to work. It's still challenging because the complexity of the data as well as the computational complexity is so big that even GPU clusters don't help yet, but we're getting closer to that. Organizational culture is the next challenge, and how do you rotate your organization into the new, and how do you bridge between old and new? And I think also there's no silver bullet. So most large organizations today talk about agile, and they think agile would change everything. But it's a fun fact that for one of the largest digital companies in the world, our company Accenture delivers one of the biggest projects we have to build their new data ecosystem globally in a non-agile project. Because as far as regulatory data protection, all these things are concerned, agile is not really perfect, and then you end up with a we model. So the question is, what's the future model for that if you coordinate 10,000s of people in a large project? And how do you bridge between the various opportunities? And then digital business models, and this is the biggest challenge, and I think I always argue there are two things in finding digital business models. There are accelerators, so you can use technology and achievements you have already to do things better, and then you can transform. The biggest problem we see today is that most companies want to transform immediately. And I was asked a few months back by the CEO of a company that mainly produces milk, how they can be the Google of milk production. And I think that's funny because it's not comparable. And they probably can become more digital in sales channels and stuff, or efficient in production, but there is not a Google way for everybody and or Facebook or Amazon way for everybody. So it's a journey to find that, and I think Google looked for a business model for some 7 or 8 years, and that will be the same for most other companies. Finding a new business model is a journey, and it goes via the steps of accelerators, small improvements, I think. And then lately, trust. This is not a diesel, but the thing is that you can use trust very fast today, especially if you're a big company. It's very easy to screw up. And smaller companies have probably bigger advantages there. But what we also see is that many startups come up with ideas that are either not legal. If you look at fintech, most of the ideas are very creative but not legal, and they don't consider regulation. And all these things happen, data protection, all these things are a challenge. And you have to get this right. And I think this is a great chance for us here in Europe and Germany specifically, because I think we have a very good and long-term understanding of data protection and that. Thanks a lot.
Hey. Okay, so it looks like we've got one question from the audience. So Andreas, if there are other people in your field or doing your kind of work that inspire you, is there anyone that comes to mind?
Well, I think there's a couple, but what I really like and admire are the founder CEOs like Steve Jobs or Jeff Bezos, and because these guys combine two things. They have a very good vision and fantastic innovation, but they also get stuff done. And that's a big difference. If you look at examples like what Steve Jobs did, he once decided to switch Mac from Motorola PowerPC to Intel, and they did this in 3 months. If you propose this to a CEO of a big company, they just wouldn't do anything like that because it would fail, or they fear that it fails.
Why do you think there's such a big challenge in getting things done?
Yet to bridge between vision and ideas and coordinating a lot of people to actually implement and succeed and deliver, that's a huge step. And coordinate externals, internals, all these things. And we see that a lot. Then once things become more complicated and go beyond 20 people, then usually companies shy away or fail.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much.
Thanks.